الاقتصادية الكويتية. ويسعدني أن أرحب بضيفة مميزة هي الدكتورة ماري كلير وهي مديرة مركز الأبحاث في المعهد الفرنسي للعلاقات الدولية الإفري. السيدة لها خبرة وتخصص في مجال دراسات الطاقة وسياساتها ونظم الرقابة فيها، وبالأخص في دول الاتحاد الأوروبي. راح تكلمنا اليوم عن تجربتها أو رؤيتها في مصادر الطاقة البديلة بالنسبة لمصدري الطاقة التقليديين في العالم قاطبة. نبذة بسيطة عن المعهد الفرنسي للعلاقات الدولية أو الإفري. تأسس سنة 1979، مقره في الجمهورية الفرنسية. هو ما يسمى نوع خاص من المؤسسات الثينك تانك أو مراكز الرصد والأبحاث. هو مستقل، ليس له توجهات تخدم فئة على حساب فئة، لكن إنما يهدف إلى الصالح العام وللتنمية المستدامة. هو على من يأتي في مقدمة المؤسسات الرصد والأبحاث اللي في القارة الأوروبية، وهو على غرار المؤسسات الموجودة بالولايات المتحدة مثل راند كوربوريشن وبروكينز انستيتيوت وغيرها من المعاهد اللي احنا نعرفها ونسمع عنها. ايضا لهم دراسات مستفيضة تتعلق بالعلاقات الدولية ودراسات الطاقة والتحولات التي تحدث في العالم، ولهم إصدارات مهمة. أهمها يمكن إصدارين. الأول يسمى برمسيس ويصدر سنويا ويتناول كل مناطق العالم وتحليلات حسب أهم التوجهات والتحولات التي تحدث في هذه المناطق. وعندهم أيضا نشرة أخرى مهمة اسمها العلاقات الدولية أو Foreign Affairs. أترك المجال للسيدة أو الدكتورة ماري كلير لتتفضل به.
السلام عليكم. بدي أتشكر أول شيء سيدنا نفس الحجري للعزيمة from your support in this research from Marcus. Thank you very much for your invitation. I will do the presentation in English. It's easier for me to talk about the oil issues in English than in Arabic or in French. So the topic of this research is about the hydrosources worldwide. Actually, this map was actually published by the Energy Information Administration, the Department of Energy, which suggests that there is a new distribution of hydrocarbon resources worldwide, of oil and gas reserves coming from unconventional resources. And clearly, if we look at the picture, we can imagine that the rules on the international energy scene have completely changed. That previously consuming countries, important consuming countries such as the US, such as China, are progressively can become major exporters on the international scene. This is what this map is suggesting. But however, we should be careful when we look at it, because these are the technically recoverable reserves, that the estimations are not the same all over the countries. That in some countries there was no estimation of the unconventional reserves, and that we are talking about technically recoverable reserves, whereas for the OPEC reserves, when we talk about proved reserves, which means that we are talking about recoverable reserves at the economic conditions and technical conditions of the day. So just to have some to pay attention to this. So this suggests a new distribution with new major resources of shale gas and of shale gas resources in the US, in China, in Argentina, in Algeria, and also of shale oil, especially the estimation focus a lot on shale oil in Russia and in the US. And if we look at the production in the American, in North America, and more particularly in the US, it's really something unexpected that happens, because when you look at the estimations of the Department of Energy in the 1990s, clearly the United States were supposed to be a big importer of gas. In 2000, there were a lot. There were a lot of projects, regasification projects, who were supposed to import LNG because to meet their rising energy demand. But however, with the development of the unconventional gas, which started actually around 2005, and which progressed had major evolution, and now the U.S. are self-sufficient in gas. Their domestic gas production is actually covering 94% of their consumption, and this was unexpected. Again, I insist, because it had a huge impact on the energy scene, and progressively the U.S. are becoming now LNG exporters. Around 2015, 2016, the first LNG project to export gas will be commissioned, and progressively they will export gas, especially to Mexico, to Canada, and to other states. And this change had a huge impact, first of all, on the U.S. economy, on the petrochemical industry, for instance, in the U.S. They've become much more competitive because of the decrease in the gas prices. And then there was a huge impact on the energy mix in the U.S. Progressively, there was clearly a decrease of coal in the energy mix in the U.S. And the irony is that it came to Europe, whereas Europe is fighting towards coal, and Europe is committed in environmental policy, but coal has become suddenly much more competitive than gas. So a lot of gas-fired capacity is excluded now in Europe, and coal is coming back to Europe. So this is the irony of the situation also. So huge impact on the U.S., huge impact on Europe also. In parallel, there was also the development of the tight oil in the U.S., which also was relatively unexpected, and is going at an important, is experiencing an important growth. 7 million per barrel per day of U.S. production in 2007. Today around 10 million per barrel per day, so a 3 million barrel per day increase in a very short period of time. And we will see the impact it had on the energy market. Just a few words just to have the figures in mind about gas and oil, because the revolution actually concerns gas, and shale oil. So this is for the U.S. What's also important to have in mind is that this unconventional gas can actually go beyond the U.S. And we have, again, the first map we show, we have a lot of, there are some countries who have a lot of potential in terms of unconventional gas. Here we have selected in this study also, we have done a focus on some countries. In Europe, for instance, it's interesting to see that the European potential in unconventional gas is important. But however, we see that in Europe there is really a scattered response. There is no consensus between the European countries on exploiting these reserves, and that Poland, Denmark, the UK are really going in this direction, and they are willing to exploit their unconventional gas reserves with various results, sometimes disappointing, notably in Poland, and that there's on the other hand countries like France and Bulgaria, who have a very strong political opposal to explore these reserves, and there was a moratorium on the exploration of these reserves. So in Europe there's no consensus. What's interesting also to mention is that the potential is important, but there are a lot of geological conditions that are completely different from the United States. that there's a strong barrier to the development at a wide scale of these resources, which is social acceptability. In Europe, it's not. It's the key issue actually. And so again, with all the forecasts that we are seeing on this topic, clearly the shale gas in Europe could be developed, but it will never be the same development as in the US, and that in the best scenarios it would compensate partially the decline of the European production, and partially you can imagine that with the current discussions today in Europe, with the situation between Russia and Europe on gas, that this is a key topic for energy security. There's also the other case of Australia, where there's a huge potential also, where the perspectives are positive, where the resources are situated in remote areas, so which are less subject to social and environmental pressure. But however, there are some costs, hurdles, some costs, obstacles, and especially in the cost of human capital, and around 40% more than in the US. China is also another interesting case because they are moving very fast on this topic also. They have announced a very ambitious program in 2012 where around 100 BCM in 2020 would be produced of unconventional gas. Very recently they have revised downwards their projections, around 30 BCM of production in 2020, but what's interesting that we are starting to observe more concrete results. However, there are again a lot of obstacles in terms of water management, in terms of infrastructure, a big obstacle in building the infrastructure necessary to transport this gas, and mostly also a technological deficit. However, we are now seeing a strategy, an investment strategy, an active investment strategy by PetroChina and CNPC and CNOOC, sorry, in the US, which allows them to import the know-how. So just to have a picture, there is also the case of Argentina, of South Africa, of Mexico, also other cases. But however, we have to say that there are a lot of uncertainties around the development of the shale gas outside the US currently. That the prospects are not that positive, and that the development as we saw it in the US is not for the medium term, at least for these countries. Just to finish briefly this part of the new, what we mean by the new hydrocarbon resources. We are not only talking about unconventional gas, we are also talking about conventional gas, but deep offshore gas, for instance. And here we see in this map the new discoveries, and clearly countries like Australia will have a very important liquefaction capacity that will come to the market in 5 years, around 2020. The projections are about 100 BCM, so the equivalent of Qatar, coming to the market in 2020, 2022 of LNG capacity. So a new producer, new major exporter is coming on the scene, which is Australia, and who will absorb a significant part of the Asian demand for gas. Another important region that we must look at is, of course, East Africa with Mozambique and Tanzania. And here again, the prospects are very positive for Mozambique, and again the figures are around 100 BCM of additional LNG coming to the market at a horizon between 2022 2025. So new countries are also joining the club of gas exporters, not only unconventional gas but also deep offshore gas. So all these new resources suggest a new distribution on the international energy scene, a change in the rapport de force between the producers and the consumers. Countries that were considered to be major consuming countries are becoming progressively exporting countries. So this is interesting, and of course the first question is what is the impact on the traditional producers? What are the impacts? First of all, we must just have in mind a major difference between these traditional producers in the case of oil and the new producers in the case of tight oil, is that we have to distinguish between low-cost producer and high-cost producer. And clearly, please don't take these figures as precisely as they are presented. They are changing a lot. This figure was published last year by the IEA, the International Energy Agency, and they are progressing a lot because of a lot of technological progress. But it just gives an idea about the proportions, and clearly the production costs vary from a few dollars in some Middle Eastern fields to $100 per barrel in some ultra-deep offshore resources. So just to say that there is an issue around the cost, the production cost, and that clearly the Middle East and North African fields are the least costly fields. This is certain, and that provides a comparative advantage for these low-cost producers comparing to the high-cost producers. There's another specificity also to have in mind, is that the nature of the tight oil wells is different than from the conventional oil, because there's a high natural rate of decline. So clearly the prospect for production is more limited. However, again, there are a lot of technological progress, a lot of gains in terms of productivity that are realized very quickly, which also changes a little bit the picture. Another issue that is a lot discussed today, given the current context around the oil price, is what is the break-even cost for these American fields. The number we are seeing a lot is around $70–80 per barrel. That is below this level. The American production will not be profitable. We are seeing, actually, I'm seeing every day a study on the issue. There's no consensus. I think it's that because there are a lot of productivity gains and the figures changes a lot. What is clear is that there are some fields that could be profitable with lower prices than $70 per barrel, but the situation is not homogeneous. There are various situations, and there are some wells which could be the break-even is much higher than $80 per barrel. So the situation is very different. And what is also certain is that to start producing the well, we need a high oil price, and that progressively the productivity gains make it more interesting and more profitable. So just to have also in mind these figures. Another issue is this figure is taken from the last World Energy Outlook, which was published last week by the IEA, and it's interesting to see that given these specificities that we were talking about, the rate of decline, the cost production, clearly the role of the Middle East, which are the traditional producers we are focusing on, their role on the oil market will be key on the long term, and that producers like Canada, like the US, they will have an important role on the medium term until 2005. We see it on the figure, but then it will progressively decline, and that the key actors will be again in the Middle East. So these are the projections of the IEA, but there are also other forecasts that go in the same direction. So this is also interesting to note that on the long term, the forecasts clearly reflect this trend. Okay, now let's move maybe to the impacts we are observing of this new hydrocarbon change on the international scene. First of all, the first impact we have observed is on the flows, and first of all on the shale gas. Clearly, the shale gas boom in the US had major impact on LNG flows. The LNG imports, the US LNG imports from Africa, from the Middle East, and from Trinidad and Tobago, they were all reduced and they were diverted to Asia, which is clearly the center of the demand of LNG today. because of the Fukushima accident, where we saw an unexpected increase in the demand of gas in Asia, and all the LNG that was supposed to go to the US actually was diverted to Asia. And of course, the most illustrating case of this is the case of Qatar, where all the LNG which was supposed to go to the US is actually reoriented to Asia. Another issue also in this change of flows on the international scene of LNG, which is linked to the shale gas revolution, but not completely. And I think it's important to mention it. And this country figures also among the countries we have studied in this work. Is the case of Algeria and Russia. Two countries who are facing actually a major challenge, which is the decrease of the gas demand in Europe. Today, the gas demand in Europe is actually, in 2013, is actually at the same level as it was in 2000. So clearly, there is a decline in the gas demand for several reasons, for the political support for renewables, because of coal coming to Europe, so it is excluding gas, for other several reasons. Clearly, there is a decline in the gas demand. And this is a huge challenge for the traditional producers such as Algeria and such as Russia. And I have looked at the statistics of the World Bank. They calculate the rent, so the difference between the value of gas production and the production costs. And we see clearly for Russia a change between 2009 and 2012 between $46 billion of rent coming from gas. So it decreased to $23 billion. So the impact is huge, and this is due to renegotiations of contracts we are observing in Europe. And I think it's important to mention it when we are evaluating the impact of this new energy landscape on the traditional producers. And the same figures are also for Algeria. There's also a huge impact on the gas rent because of this decline in the gas demand in Europe. And concerning oil, we observed also a clear change in the global oil trade flows, and we observed clearly a decrease in the imports of the U.S. of crude oil. And what's interesting is that again, countries like Algeria were really affected because they export light oil, which is actually in competition with the light oil produced in the U.S. And this was the same for Nigeria and the same for Libya and for Western African countries in general. So this is important because for these countries there was a sudden decrease in their exports towards the US, and they had to find new clients, and they were also reoriented towards Asia. The impact was less immediate and less important for countries such as Saudi Arabia and such as Kuwait, because the oil which is exported is heavy oil and is more adapted to the refineries in the US, and there was no competition with the oil produced in the US. So this is an important aspect also. There's also an impact on the refining products, and where here again the Middle Eastern products, refining products decreased the exports towards the US because they are also in competition with the US refining products. Now, what are the impacts on the oil price? It's very difficult to answer very precisely to this question, but to just suggest a few elements which are maybe also useful given the current context around the oil price. First of all, what's interesting to see, if you look at this figure, you have in red the oil production in the U.S. Since 2010, and we see so in 2014 around 3 million of barrels per day of new production. But however, in parallel, there was a decrease in the production of Iran, of Libya, of Syria, of Yemen, and clearly there was a compensation between the additional production of the US and the production of the other countries. That was what we call the missing barrels. That was not on the market, and this compensated clearly the offer. And this is why since 2010 we were actually in a situation of relative stability of oil price then, which is an exceptional situation for the oil market to have this stability for 3 years around the oil prices. However, this changed, as we all know, in June 2014, and we see this decrease, a very sudden decrease in the oil prices. Some factors that can explain this decrease is that there were downward revisions in the demand of Asia, of Europe, which clearly impacted the oil price. They reacted immediately to the announcements of the IMF in the summer. So this is one of the main factors that is explaining this decrease, plus an excess of offer and a comeback of the Libyan production to a certain level, the Iraqi production also, which was not expected. So all these factors can help explaining why the oil price is decreasing. But I'm sure we will have the opportunity to come back to this during the discussion. So just to say, my point here is to say is that the tight oil did not have an immediate impact on the oil price, and that it is due actually to other factors and notably to the demand. The case of natural gas prices is also interesting because immediately when we started observing this gas boom in the US, there was a decrease in the gas prices on the Henry Hub. In Japan, in parallel in Asia, there was this important increase, and clearly we have these regional gas markets, which was again unexpected when LNG started to come on the market. We were all expecting that we will have a global market, one price, and clearly we are in a situation where we have 3 regional markets, very low prices in the US, very high prices in Asia, and Europe lying in the middle, with prices around $11 per million of BTU, and LNG is not actually going to Europe, it's actually going to Asia because it's much more interesting to go there. And you see the situation of the LNG terminals in France and in Europe in general, they have around 20% of utilization rate. So this is also a key issue for Europe given the current context. So just to say that the impact on the oil and gas prices is important. It was really important on the gas price, and on the oil price it actually started in June 2014. And if we look at the longer term impact on traditional producers, given what could be the impact? First of all, we know that these countries are facing several internal challenges. The first one is that they have a very important reliance on the oil sector, on the oil prices, and if you look at this figure, we have the break-even oil prices, which is published by the IMF, so it was published, I think, this summer, and clearly we see that the break-even oil price for a lot of countries is above $100 per barrel, which means that Libya, that Algeria, Bahrain, Iran, they all need very high oil prices to balance their fiscal budget and to balance their current account. So this is a huge problem because they have growing budgetary needs. Interesting to notice the case of Kuwait, which is relatively low. The break-even price is around $50 per barrel. Saudi Arabia, there was a re-evaluation very recently published by the IMF. For 2013, it was around $90 per barrel for Saudi Arabia. For Russia, it is around $100 per barrel. So clearly, it's an issue. It's clearly an issue for countries like Algeria, like Nigeria, who have very important population, who have very high budgetary needs, and for them it's a key issue. These very high oil break-even price. And this is an issue, of course, because of the high dependency toward the oil sector. Unfortunately, in several traditional producers, the diversification policies did not really generate the expected results, and that in these countries clearly there's an important share of the GDP which is actually based on the oil and gas sector. Here we see the ratio of the oil and gas of the oil and gas rents as a percentage of GDP, and we see clearly the figures are very, very high. Another internal challenge that these countries are facing is actually their rising path of domestic energy consumption, and this is clearly an issue. It is an issue for most traditional oil and gas producers, and clearly the case of Saudi Arabia illustrates clearly this trend. We see that the energy consumption is increasing at every year at a 5% rate every year, electricity consumption 10% rate, and there were some studies that published recently, observers saying that if Saudi Arabia continues on this trend, it could import oil in 2038. Of course, we have to take it with a lot of, be careful with these numbers, but it's interesting to see that these trends are really unsustainable for a lot of these countries, and that this is one of the major challenges for these countries. It has an impact, not only an economical impact because of the additional resources that could be reserved to exports, but it has also environmental impacts, as we know, in terms of CO2 emissions. So this is clearly an issue, and there should be a reform towards more energy efficiency and to decrease the levels also of energy intensity, and to address the issue, very sensitive issue of fossil fuel subsidies in a lot of oil and gas producing countries. What we have also noticed in this work is that actually the situation of the traditional oil and gas exporters is not homogeneous, of course. We have on one side countries like Algeria, like Russia, not Russia, Russia is another situation, but like Nigeria, who's really struggling to put in place reforms. And on the other hand, we have countries in the GCC who have, to a certain extent, elaborated a very dynamic strategy based on geographical and sectorial diversification, notably towards Asia. There are a lot of investments in the petrochemical sector in Europe from Saudi Arabia, from also Kuwait. Russia is also very well present in the downstream sector in Europe. There are a lot of partnership with Asian countries. There are also investments from Qatar in Australia, from Kuwait in Canada in the unconventional resource to acquire technology. Gazprom is also present in the West Africa. So there is this dynamic towards geographical diversification, towards sectorial diversification in some of these traditional oil and gas producers. However, there's another challenge that these countries are facing is that there are huge investment needs in the oil and gas sector. And again, I will cite one figure of the International Energy Agency. Around $74 billion of investment needs in the Middle East and North African countries are needed in order to maintain only the current production levels of oil and gas sectors. So just to say that this is also an important issue for a lot of these countries, and that there are some obstacles in the investments in terms of human resources, in terms of technology, and that there are reforms. We were talking this morning about Mexico, which is a clear. It's an interesting case of a reform of all the investment framework. There were also attempts of reforms in Algeria with more mitigated success. So there's this need sometimes to change the investment framework. Another important issue for these traditional oil and gas exporters is the diversification of the energy mix, because the oil consumption represents an important share of the electricity, and here we have substitution towards more renewables or other resources or gas. And here GCC countries they announced ambitious reforms, especially in Kuwait. I think the figure is 10%, in Qatar 2% of renewable energy in the electricity consumption, Bahrain 5%, and of course the most ambitious announcement is again Saudi Arabia, around 50% of the electricity is announced to be come from renewable energy sources in 2032. So there are these aims, these targets, sometimes realistic, sometimes maybe less realistic, but there is this strong desire to reform and to diversify the energy mix. And there are also some energy efficiency programs which are also announced and which are needed also to improve this the energy consumption trend, especially. So this brings me to my conclusion. The point was to say is that there's a new energy landscape. Of course, there are new unconventional resources arriving to the market. There are also conventional resources, but the point of this paper which showed that there are also other challenges to be taken into account, especially the demand. We have to look at the demand. There is the energy transition program in the OECD countries, especially in Europe, which is there is some substitution to the oil to oil, and clearly the forecast shows that actually the demand of the non-OECD country in oil will be, for the first time this year, will be higher than the demand of the OECD countries in oil, and progressively we are in a trend where there's a complete shift towards non-OECD countries. And also the forecast published recently, they show that there's a sort of slowdown of the growth of oil consumption on the long term, not on the medium term, but on the long term as of 2030, 2040. So just to say that there are also several challenges also in the demand, on the demand side, not only on the supply side, that there are the internal challenges we have mentioned, that there's an adaptation to this new geopolitics for the global hydrocarbon flows, which is necessary, that the oil shock, the US oil shock is only one parameter of the oil price, but there are also other factors, the demand trend, but there are also production increase of what we call low-cost producers, such as Iraq, which has also to be taken into account because it contributes also to change the picture. And the final message is that clearly the role of the Middle Eastern producers will be key on the long term, but there's sort of adaptation during this medium term. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much, Mari, Claire, for this interesting presentation where you depicted the new landscape of oil production, both conventional and unconventional hydrocarbon sources. We perhaps can open the door now for questions if there are any. Otherwise, I will take advantage of my position. Could you present your name first?
خليل بوشيري، موظف سابق في شركة نفط الكويت. أنا عارفة إن البترول قاعد سعره ينزل وقاعد يزيد الإنتاج. هذا شنو؟ لعبة القرب. القرب لعبها عدل وقاعد يروج لها الآن في الوقت الحاضر في نزول أسعار النفط اللي هو في مصلحته وبضررنا احنا، عرفتي؟ في نفس الوقت هو المستفيد الأول واحنا الخسرانين. ومع الأسف الشديد أن الاستراتيجية البترولية الكويتية تحاول تروج لإنتاج 4 ملايين برميل شركة نفط الكويت. في هالوضع الفاسد اللي احنا فيه، والسبب شنو؟ لعبة القرض. هم شو يسوون؟ نزيد الانتاج، نصدر اكثر، وتصير رسامين موجودة مخزونة في قرب، في بنوك قربية، وترجع للعبة، يلعبون اللعبة، يسوون مثل ما لعبوا مع بنك مورجن، لعبة بنك مورجن والبنوك 2008 خسرنا احنا احتياطاتنا يمكن نصها من الخجل عندنا احنا، ما يتكلمون المليارات اللي خسرناها. فلذلك الآن لعبة، ولازم الاسعار ترجع لسابقتها وتزيد. والان احنا البترول قاعد نبيعه بالبرميل على الوزن، القياس بالبرميل. مع السنوات القادمه راح يصير بالقلم. شاكر لك. شكرا.
راح نجاوب الاستاذ. تفضل استاذ، ناخذ سؤالين بعد وبعدين نفتح الباب للاجوبه. تفضل استاذ.
انا بس كان سؤال بسيط. انا سمعت ان اكثر دوله موظف في بنك الكويت المركزي، بس كان سؤالي ان اكثر دوله تصدر نفط لامريكا هي كندا، او انا سمعت ان كندا هي، بس كنت بتاكد.
سؤال ثالث وبعدين نجوبه. تفضل استاذ عامر. تفضل.
I just wanted to ask you about the supply side of non-conventional oil. What's the figure now on a daily basis and barrel terms? This is one question. The other question is about on the demand side. Do you think that there is a chronic recession in Europe which will induce a decrease in the demand for oil in the coming years? And is this related to the demographic changes in the European Union? And you expect, as you mentioned, that maybe the potential demand in the future will be in the non-European countries. But would we consider, for instance, the United States, after a few years, will come back and import oil from the traditional producers? Thank you.
So let's start with the introduction around
If you could talk a little bit about IFRI as a unique model of a think tank in Europe, then perhaps you can talk about the prices and your statement on the high level, according to the gentleman, of oil production in this regime of low prices.
Well, first of all, about IFRI, so the French Institute for International Relations, it's an independent think tank which exists since 1979. It was founded by Thierry de Montbrial, and it's clearly in a unique position in France, an independent think tank with a very wide positioning in France and in Europe and internationally. And clearly we work on international relations in general. We have a lot of geopolitical issues. We work on several. We have regional centers working in Asia, on Russia, on Africa. So a very strong regional focus, and we have also research centers working on more cross-sectoral issues, the energy center, security center, and immigration. So we try to cover all the geopolitical aspects in international relations, and we have a unique positioning in Europe in the think tank. But I think Thomas Gomar can also complete my presentation, especially on the role of IFRI in the debate. The second question about the conspiration and clearly around the oil prices, clearly today I think that we cannot completely explain what is happening on the oil prices. It is a situation that until June 2014 we had this relative stability, and then suddenly, because of some announcements around the downward revision around demand, there was this sudden decrease. I think that today there is a sort of consensus that the new equilibrium around the oil price is more around $80 per barrel and not anymore around $100 per barrel, because there is a new offer because of the demand trends. So there is this new consensus that the market fundamentals reflect more a price around $80 per barrel more than $100 per barrel. The key question today is to know whether the OPEC organization will decide to react and to take off from the market a certain level of production. And this is clearly, we are in the situation that has always existed in OPEC, that we have divergent interests inside OPEC between countries having very important budgetary needs, and they want OPEC to react and to import, withdraw a certain share of the production. And on parallel, there are countries that can cope probably to a certain period of time with lower prices. And this is clearly the issues of it would be only geopolitical, I guess, political discussions that can explain the outcome. My feeling is that OPEC cannot, that OPEC will have to react at a certain period of time if the trend continues to decline. If it will be on Thursday or in a few months, I don't know, but I think that at a certain period of time, OPEC will have to react. Otherwise, there's a risk that when they decide to react, it will be too late, and there will be no real influence on the oil price. But it's difficult to give more precise answers to these trends. There was the question.
Canada, I believe, the largest exporter to the US.
Exactly. Yes.
Not Saudi Arabia.
I said Saudi Arabia.
No, I mean, most people think it's Saudi Arabia.
Exactly. Yes, it's Canada. Yes, and now even more. Yes. There was this question about Europe, about the demand side in Europe, whether there will be a decrease in the oil demand for Europe. Clearly today we are in a trend that for oil, for the electricity generation, there are substitutions. They are to renewables, to gas, and even to coal in Germany. So clearly in Europe, the trend is towards a decrease in the oil consumption. Of course, in the petrochemical sector and in the transport sector, oil will remain dominant and is dominant even if we have some alternatives in terms of transport, but it's not that significant. But clearly on a global level in Europe, there is a decline towards the oil demand, and it will increase afterwards. I don't know if I can say a decline in the oil demand, but in any case, a trend towards a decline in the medium or in the longer term. And it's also the case for the US. It's the case for all OECD countries. There are programs and energy transitions, and clearly today the core of the demand of oil will be more in non-OECD countries, and on all the projections show this trend. And in Europe, we are typically in a situation where Europe is the most significant example towards this trend. But I'm just talking about general trends. Of course, the market for oil is huge, it's still important in Europe, but just to say that on the longer term we can expect a decrease because of this energy transition, and because in the generation of electricity there are some substitution now to oil.
What about the supply side, the current supply of non-conventional oil?
Globally, it's the US who has this major share of light tight oil. 50% of the American production comes from light tight oil. Outside Europe, the prospects are outside the US. The prospects are not that clear. There are some program in Russia. There are some big potentials. Actually, the main reserves are concentrated in Russia and the US on the tight oil. There are some programs, but they are not that developed, so I don't have the figures in mind. But the more important, of course, is the US.
Thank you. Perhaps we can open for a new batch of questions.
My name is Marzouk from the United Nations Development Program, UNDP. I had 3 questions. I'll make them quick. The first is about the environmental, but I'm wondering if this could be a serious factor in the future, in the medium term especially. I mean, last week the Keystone XL pipeline in the US was defeated through environmental and political pressure, not economic. And there are precedents in Europe with GMOs, genetically modified organisms and food, with them being by environmental and political pressure. So this is the first question. The second one is about the break-even indicators that we use. Sometimes it occurs to me that this might not be an accurate depiction of what could happen if prices fall below a certain point, because this is only an accounting. Most cases, I don't know exactly how the IMF calculates them, but the way we do at least more of an accounting fiscal numbers from the government. But this does not capture the indirect impacts, does not capture the effects on the private sector, does not capture the confidence effects, which can be huge, can be a more serious downspiral. So do you think that we should perhaps think of a different way of assessing the resilience of oil-producing countries? The third and last question is about the structure of the oil market in terms of the major oil companies. When these new technologies are rapidly developing, do you think the national oil companies in countries like the GCC can cope? Can they perhaps import the technologies quick enough or develop them? So I was wondering what you thought about that.
Thank you, Dr. Mari, for your presentation. It was really wonderful. My name is Ali Al-Haidar. I work in Kuwait Exploration Company. We are doing exploration outside of Kuwait for oil and gas. Simply, I have just 2 questions. Will the fiscal terms and royalty cost can be changed in the future, for example, for production sharing contract and concession? And my second question is, what do you think of the current oil price? Is it political price or market price? Thank you.
Sorry, your first question about the fiscal is outside.
Acting manager for the non-conventional Kuwait Institute for Scientific Research. I still think that the picture is too tainted to just draw in broad lines the prices and the forecast of the shale oil and the shale gas, which, by the way, we alternate. We say shale oil and then we say shale gas. Everyone has its different impact. At the same time, we are forgetting completely the reserves outside the United States. I mean, the Mongolian discoveries now, the Saudi Arabia discovery, Morocco, Jordan, Sudan, Chad, all are big players coming into power, and they will definitely turn the table for everybody. Also, not to mention that the decline rate for these tight oil shale gas, it is so horrendous that we talk about 3% recovery with a lot of, what do you say, a good picture to move it from 3% to 10%, which is still not comparable to the conventional oil that we are speaking of. There's a lot of factors. United States, with the wonderful achievement they have, still they are far away from the market, and we are seeing shift of the market from US, Europe into mainly China, Korea, Japan, Vietnam, all the East Asia. Also the BRICS company is also a major player. So it's really premature to tell how the market or the prices are going to be with the current situation. Thank you.
First of all, on the environmental aspect, the fracking technology, clearly this is a huge issue in Europe. There is a huge debate on this. There were a lot of there was a consultation from the European Commission all over Europe about what is the first obstacle to the development of shale gas and in Europe, and clearly it was like 70% of the answers were around because of the environmental impact. So clearly, for these resources to be developed, there is a huge work to be done in terms of social acceptability, in terms of to analyze the social impact. And in the UK is an interesting case because there was a very important, extensive debate with the local communities around the impact, the environmental impact of shale gas, and the government really established a very strict regulation in terms of to promote transparency by all the works by the companies when there was seismic reactions. They stopped for 1 year. There was a moratorium on the production. So clearly, it is in Europe. It is the major obstacle today if we want to envisage a more extensive production of shale gas. In Poland, the debate were less important. In eastern part of Europe, clearly, the economic and the energy security is more a priority more than the environmental concerns. The second question, I fully agree with you. The break-even prices are only indicators, and this is the first thing we put. But I fully agree that we need to evaluate more deeply the impact, and clearly the confidence is one factor. At the end, the break-even prices is only a price to balance the budget, and it's not a big deal if the budget is not balanced for 1 year or 2. I mean, in France, it's not balanced; it's not a problem. So it's not a big deal. And clearly we need to work further to find more indicators. I fully agree with your thoughts on this. And the question on the NOC, on the national oil companies, there are a lot of partnership, a lot of joint ventures ongoing, and this is one. There's a new model which is developed now today, which is new relations between NOC and new NOC from new producing countries, especially with Asian companies, and clearly this is a key factor for importing know-how and technology, and there I guess that there are a lot of experience. Between Canada and Kuwait, I know that there's a recent contract. So there are lots of positive experiences. Canada, Qatar, in Australia, and in the US also. So this is a way of importing the technology, which is really, I think, a positive, favorable. Yes, your question was it?
Well, the fiscal terms and the royalty cost
yes.
will be changed in the future.
I mean, this is a very it's changed. The fiscal terms changes every time we have a change in the oil prices. I mean, in general, I mean, the producing countries before when the oil prices were very low in the 1998, the fiscal term were much more favorable to oil companies than they are afterwards when we are in situations of high oil prices. So I cannot give a really precise answer to your question, but what I can say is that Clearly, it depends on the current, in French we say rapport de force, on the international scene. It depends on the oil prices. It also depends, of course, as you know, on the quality of the oil and on the power of negotiations inside the country. So I cannot really say whether there will be a trend towards lower fiscal term, less favorable to the producing countries or not. But what we see is that the trend, when we have a period of very low oil prices, the trend were more favorable to the oil companies than they are now.
Because you mentioned that for the oil companies, they need huge investments, and especially in explorations. For exploration now, most of IOCs is going to offshores now, either for conventional or non-conventional hydrocarbons, which needs a lot of investments. And according now to the current oil price, the thing, I don't know, could be cheaper. But usually in our work, fiscal terms and royalty cannot, it's hard to be changed. It's hard.
The royalties, yes.
Yes.
The royalties.
And my second question is?
Your second question was whether I think if the current oil price is a political price or is a market price. I think it's a market price. No, I mean it's a market price. The decrease is justified by the market fundamentals because of the demand revisions. However, whether OPEC will decide to react or not, etc. Here we have the political influence.
My personal opinion that OPEC will not change now.
Will not change.
Yeah. My voice is. I think it's my personal. They will not change anything. They will keep it as it is.
And if it decreases even more?
I don't think they will not do it. They will. The history talks
of OPEC as that we should take into account. It's only my point of view. I completely agree with your remarks. I presented a map with the other with the deep offshore resources. I talked about Mozambique, Australia, but I fully agree that there are a lot of discoveries in Morocco, in East Mediterranean that I didn't talk about, but we work a lot on these resources also. So I fully share with you. This is why I called it new energy landscape, because actually, and this is the message I was trying to deliver in my presentation, that tight oil and shale gas is only one part of the picture. As you said, we have to take the whole picture together, and there are new producers arriving to the market that sometimes the volumes are not that important at the global scale, but for these countries they are huge. So, and we can fully take the case of the East Mediterranean countries, which is also a very interesting case to look at. I fully agree with this, your remark on the decline rate, and I share also your views about the fact that the market is premature. This is why you see in my presentation we try to assess the impact we have already observed in terms of the flows. Here we have immediate facts, but of course on the longer term it's difficult to see how the market will react. And clearly for now the US it's premature to have a really longer term view and to assess it on the long term, and whether to know if it's sustainable or not. And clearly the traditional oil and gas producers are in a position, as we said, they have a comparative advantage, and it cannot be compared to the situation of these new producers arriving to the market.
Also, the Arctic oil is coming back. A lot of new mixes with the fossil. Talking about the extra and the extreme heavy oil also.
So many oils are coming back. So I don't think even the shale oil in the United States is going to sustain other competition. So, I mean, not only the conventional oil from the Middle East, there are other oils. And still, by far, the Middle East has the advantage.
Because it's easy to access, cheaper to produce, and its quality is not so bad. So it's really going to be a favorable selection of energy, or maybe yet better, industrialization, where we see that a lot of minerals like iron, nickel, aluminum are dwindling, and you have companies investing in the oil as a nanocomposites and other material for the industrialization. So still by far the conventional oil is going to play its role, maybe not for the energy per se, but also for the industrialization.
I agree, and clearly if there's a very important decrease in the oil prices, these producers you were talking about will be excluded because the cost production are very high. So again, there's a comparative advantage, and this is why all the forecasts see really the Middle East as the long-term provider, and the world market needs the Middle East, the oil, to respond to the global oil needs. Otherwise,
I think we're in for a last batch of questions, if any. Otherwise, okay. If there is no question, I would like to leave to open the door for Mr. Thomas Gomar from IFRI to talk a little bit about the IFRI as a think tank. I know you co-produced a paper recently on that made a lot of impact in France and Europe and in Kuwait among your leadership. And then I would like to invite our esteemed guests to another event tomorrow, hosted by Marcus in the Chairman's Club at the Tower of Burgan Bank. It's going to be presented by Mr. Thomas Gomar, and it's going to be about the EU and the Ukraine crisis. You can perhaps talk a little bit about it as a teaser for tomorrow.
Okay, good evening. So you have given me 1 minute for making the teasing on IFRI on the banks, and IFRI very quickly, very kindly, Manaf referred to a long article I have just published with Thierry de Montbrial in the Débat, and this article will be translated into English, so it will be much more easy to get access to it. The main idea is to remind that think tanks are non-profit organizations. It's a very small industry in the world, but quite active. It's a worldwide industry, dominated by US think tanks historically and at the time being, but we are facing an evolution within this industry with emerging countries which do invest significantly on that, and also European countries which have their own tradition in think tanks activity. Our job at IFRI, in fact, is to produce policy-oriented research and to make debates. That means that we want to have a research made on objective criteria, but this research is supposed to be useful. And we are supposed to interact with 4 main spheres. The first one is the political one, including diplomatic sphere, international organization. The second one is the business one, and all resources are coming more and more from this sphere. And the third one is the media. Media are extremely important to disseminate our research. And the last one is academia, because at the beginning we are all more or less academic. So to define the think tank, in fact, we use three main elements. The first one is to say that to create a think tank you need to have permanent researchers. There is no good research without good researchers. So you need to invest on your human capital, I would say, and to manage researchers, which is, believe me, quite challenging sometimes. The second element is to help to participate, to contribute to the making decision process for the public actor and for the private actors. And the last element of definition, it is in fact to remind, targeted to the public interest. We are not defending, because we are non-profit, we are not defending private interest. So that's for the brief presentation. Obviously, I would be glad to elaborate more. And once again, I refer to this article. Now, the teasing for the session tomorrow morning. Very bluntly speaking, I will refer to an op-ed in the Financial Times 11 November by I forget his name, Leon Rackman, who said one interesting thing is to say the main security challenge right now for Europe, it is not Daesh, like it is very often said, it is the situation in Ukraine. And I share his view, and I will try to explain why tomorrow morning. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much.
Extend special thanks to our esteemed audience and their excellent questions. It had helped elevate the debate and met the expectations of our friend from the E3. And finally, I would like to thank Kuwait Economic Society for hosting this event. Thank you very much.